Yeah.
It wasn't super hard to do it through Jitsi, but yeah, this is easier. Okay, and we're live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be starting moment. Ah, dang! I need to mute that. Always forget. But we will be starting shortly, folks. Just hang tight. Tonight we will be talking about mermaids and sea monsters and um, whatever else of an oceanic bent we feel like talking about. I'm just gonna post the link.
Great God, Poseidon.
Though I hear it likes to be called Poe these days.
Oh,
I'm making that up. Well, it's from a comic strip, obviously, not like folklore. Okay, that's one post. Got to post it two more places, and then we're good to go. Brian, you're supposed to jangle keys. Although at this point, I think it's more the memory of jangling keys that I'm referring to than you actually doing it because it's been a couple
yeah, I
of
don't
years,
think I've
hasn't it?
done that in a long time.
Particularly, you used to do it when we were on the actual radio.
Yeah, yeah, when we had the radio show in Hamilton. That was kind of
Uh,
fun. I missed the
So do
studio.
I. Okay, and that's one more post, and we're good to go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I apologize for us missing last week. Um, Things came up as they tend to do. I am your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist and Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am joined by my co-hosts
Ryan McKinley, vampire author and general weirdo.
and Godfather of Vampire Thrillers. As always, folks, check
Sometimes.
out Brian's books on Amazon. They're great. I highly recommend them. He just had a new one come out a couple months ago now.
Yes,
Vampire Gangsters. How can you not love that? I mean, seriously.
I would hope.
Drawing Dead and Blood Money are the two books in that series.
Yeah,
Ancient
dead
Blood
money.
and Ancient Enemies are the other one.
Yep.
And Dead Money is the most recent. But more is in the works, is it not?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I'm looking at probably the next thing coming out is going to be an anthology of short stories.
It's
Me and
always a
some
good
people
choice.
are working on some short stories to take place in the universe.
And I need to get back to working on that collaboration with you for one.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to do that.
Yes, we are, and I need to stop forgetting. I mean, I'd say I was procrastinating, but it's not even that. It's, oh, wait, I need to do that. I keep
Yeah.
forgetting.
Write a note to
But
yourself.
first, I don't lose the note, because that's the way that works. At any rate, though, tonight's topic is mermaids, sirens. We were just going to do those, in fact, but both of us kind of realized neither of us knows that much about either. So we're going to expand out a little, and we'll talk about mermaids, sirens, maybe some sea monsters, sea serpents,
Yep.
um, weird
Water
things like
spirits.
the water spirits, the Flying Dutchman. There's a lot of oceanic folklore and a lot of folklore of lakes and rivers. Um, Funny enough, personally, I'm a huge fan of the ocean. Actually, in fact, my fiance last night and I wound up wandering over to a local aquarium, mostly
Yeah.
to go look at the sharks. I won't even pretend it was anything else. I love sharks. Um, but yeah, what's interesting to me, at least, is there's a lot of mermaid folklore going back a very long time. Though there are mermaid stories in Mesopotamia.
Mhm. And there another one that seems to be in folklores all over the world.
Yeah, it kind of depends on it being near a body of water, I would think, for obvious reasons.
Sure.
You know, I don't think I'm taking a stab at it here, but I'm guessing that any native tribes that say hung out mostly in the desert in any part of the world don't have a lot of mermaid stories. Be
No, they have
fascinating
different
if they
creatures.
did. What?
I said they probably have different creatures. They have the ones
Yeah,
that appear as mirages and lead you off into like starvation or whatever.
yeah. But the mermaids, the idea of these women of various descriptions. I mean, when most people think of a mermaid, they think of a woman, and that's the funny thing. They always say a woman with a fishtail, but it's not really a fishtail because it's usually parallel to their body, not perpendicular. Fishtails are like this to the body. Dolphin and whales have the tails that are that way.
Hmm.
Um, but there are also stories of mermaids where they have two legs, but both are flippers at the end.
Ah,
And even stories of mermaids that look completely human, but swim in the water, breathe water.
and there are mermen.
This is also true, although not as popular or as well known today as mermaids.
No.
I gee, I wonder why the naked women are more popular these days. I can't imagine.
Well, even back in the day, I think there was a reason for it, because the great majority of sailors of any kind in most nations tend to be male. It was traditionally always a male profession. So naturally, the logic being, if you were going to try to lure somebody into the water or onto the rocks or whatever it may be, it's going to be a beautiful woman to appeal to all of the male sailors. Now, if you had a bunch of
True,
female sailors, then it would be mermen.
and that's a legitimate point. And psychologically speaking, if guys stuck without women at sea for long periods of time are going to fantasize about anything, it's women, not men.
Yep.
Because if they want to think sexually about men, they're surrounded by them. They don't need to fantasize.
Yeah.
Um, oh, which reminds me in a roundabout way, Happy Pride Month to everyone.
Yeah.
Because it is June the 1st, it is the beginning of Pride. We here are 100% pro LGBT.
Yes.
Um, if you don't like it, tough. There are other channels. If you wonder about that in Christianity, I highly recommend Dan McClellan's channel, where he will explain to you why the Bible doesn't say what you think it says about homosexuality. And he knows a lot more about the Bible than I do. So,
Hmm.
yeah, he's a biblical scholar, and a lot of his basically self-appointed job in life seems to be to make the formal scholarship going on about the Bible, which he also engages in, more accessible to random people on the street.
Which is good.
Yeah, I approve. I'm a big fan of his channel. I just started his book, For the Bible Says So. What people get right and wrong about what the Bible says about big issues like homosexuality, slavery, and things of that nature.
I mean, if you're going to claim to devote your life to this
Yeah,
book, you ought to at least know what it actually says rather than what some guy said it says.
which is all a topic we could easily do in its own right. I keep trying to, if anyone here who listens to this, or if I get very lucky and Dan McClellan ever listens to this, love to have him on the show.
Mhm.
Highly respect his work. But he's a busy guy, so I don't fault him for not responding to email. And, at any rate,
Back to mermaids.
back to mermaids. So it's the interesting thing with mermaids of they occur all over the world. And this creates a giant problem for the most popular explanation for where mermaid legends come from. I'm betting you have, but certainly ever since I was a kid, the story I've heard is that the manatee is why people told mermaid stories. Have you ever heard that explanation?
Yeah, but that never made a whole lot of sense to me because you take one look at a manatee or sea cow, and there's no way you're confusing that for a human woman.
It actually does make sense in its actual proper context. So here's the thing: manatees don't explain all mermaid legends. Brian is absolutely correct. A manatee or a dugong, and there's a couple of other similar creatures, looks nothing like a human woman, except in the vaguest possible sense. I mean, for God's sakes, they have whiskers. The other, there's other big problems to it as well, which is manatees are native to the Caribbean and the southern parts of the United States. The oldest and the most widespread stories of mermaids are from from the Middle East and Scandinavia, neither of which are areas that anything like a manatee is native to or ever has been.
Right.
It's a terrible explanation for mermaids. But there is one story about someone seeing mermaids that was recorded in 1493 by the by one of the folks on Christopher Columbus's ship, where it comments that Columbus had gone off the coast of Hispaniola, which is modern day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and seen mermaids. Particularly, Columbus apparently told the navigator, who's the one who recorded it, I just remembered, that mermaids looked a lot more like men than he expected. That was probably a manatee that he saw.
Yeah.
But that is not where the legend of the mermaid comes from. It's not where the oldest stories are. It's one specific instance that it sort of fits. Especially when you add this is after being at sea for a very long period of time, without any on a ship full of men, and for that matter, Columbus. I think this was, no, this was the second voyage. I was going to say on his first voyage, by the time he got anywhere near the New World, he and his men were low on rations and low on water.
Mm.
Um, but I think this is very much a case of guy who's been stuck at sea with a bunch of dudes for a very long period of time. Anything that looks remotely female is now female to him. Um, so yeah, and yeah, he thought the manatee was. There is actually a better naturalistic explanation for mermaids, though. Particularly one that explains more of mermaid legend than a manatee ever could.
Mm.
It's no being around water under certain atmospheric conditions, particularly before a thunderstorm, creates all sorts of weird optical illusions. One of the most famous is what's called Fata Morgana, where the ocean can seem to reflect nearby cities. And you can go look up Fata Morgana online. No way I can describe it with words will do justice how weird it is, and it's an optical illusion. So you can and people have videotaped this.
Mm.
But there's another one that can happen that happens under fairly specific conditions. Ideally, the observer has to be at the level of the water. For example, it's been noted many times by people standing on the shore looking at the ocean,
Mm.
or below the level of the water. Um, and the thing is, again, some of the oldest and most widespread mermaid stories are Scandinavian. They come from the Vikings. Viking longships, the deck actually rides below the surface of the water.
Huh.
So when you're at that position, before or during a thunderstorm, it can create a weird optical effect, can distort objects in the water. Seals, for example, dolphins, whales, floating wood, and make them look very human-like.
Huh.
This would explain why people, see women in places that manatees are not found. It would explain why the tails are more like mammalian tails than fish tails.
Hmm.
It would also explain similar folklore that you find in Scottish legends of what are known as selkies, which are women that put on seal skins and can go swimming as seals. They see a woman in the water, then the optical illusion passes, and it's a seal. And instead of concluding it's a weird optical effect that made a seal look human, they think she transformed into a seal.
Right. Also, that
Well,
ties in with the old folklore that mermaids and stuff were harbingers of storms or caused big storms.
you're absolutely right. And there's actually another step to that.
Hmm.
Particularly, it's the sound of a mermaid singing that causes storms.
Okay.
Dolphins and whales are both famous for singing.
Yep.
But there's even an explanation for when it isn't an animal or when the mermaid is supposed to be using some sort of musical instrument, which is in cases of high wind, particularly, like, for example, during or just before a thunderstorm, the wind whipping about the rigging and the sails on a ship can sound extremely musical.
Hmm.
So, yes, this would explain what mermaids look like. This explains why they're supposed to be harbingers of storms. It explains their singing. And it's a naturalistic explanation that doesn't invoke the paranormal in any way. And this is a common problem that investigators like myself have when dealing with some of the harder core skeptics. Is some skeptics will jump on the simplest explanation that fits some of the facts. Like, again, manatees were a perfectly good explanation for that particular and probably a few related stories of mermaids. It didn't fit the whole thing, and by stopping and not bothering to continue to do the research, they missed a larger explanation. Um, that I am not also for that, Rick, I'm not absolutely dismissing the idea of mermaids. Just saying there is an actual explanation that covers the folklore very well. Um, what I find fascinating is the commonalities going back thousands of years, because so many different cultures see them as harbingers of storms, and the related, very related idea of sirens, where their singing draws men in to their
Yeah.
deaths. Um, what's interesting is something about this, though, in particular, I think, is something my mentor Lou Gentili pointed out to me once. If you read a lot of folklore, if you read a lot of modern experiences people have with the paranormal,
Hmm.
too, for that matter, you get supernatural behavior on top of the water. A lot. You know, there are ghost ships reported all over the place.
Hmm.
Um, the most famous, of course, being the Flying Dutchmans, where the captain made a bet with the devil about sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and they were cursed to sail the seas till Judgment Day. And hi, Lisa, for truth. And there are a number of other variations on the Flying Dutchman myth and similar stories of people forced to wander the oceans, never to set foot on land, which of course was borrowed by the Pirates of the Caribbean movies to a point, and then they mixed in some other things and made up some stuff of their own.
Yep.
Um, but you don't hear, other than mermaids and sirens, spirits that live in the water are a lot less common. That's an interesting question, Lisa for Truth asks, which is what's the difference between sirens and sylphs? Um,
Hmm.
I'm not sure. Sylphs are usually associated with fairy, um, whereas sirens are usually kind of seen as a physical creature that just lives in the water in most folklore. I want to say. I've also seen, and this actually ties well into something else I wanted to bring up tonight, that sylphs are often commonly associated as water elemental spirits.
Hmm.
Now, the most famous water elemental spirits are are called undines, but sylphs are sometimes associated that way too. That they're more, which also ties into. Oh no, I'm sorry. Looking it up. There's the obvious difference. So the original time that we see the idea of the sylph brought up is by an alchemist, actually,
Hmm.
by the name of Paracelsus, who's an actually really interesting and important historical figure.
Yeah. Heard of him.
Um, Paracelsus is actually widely considered the father of modern toxicology, and is famously quoted as saying that all things are poison save the dose. Because if you take too much of anything, it can be lethal.
Mm.
I mean, even breathing too much oxygen will kill you. Drinking too much water can kill you.
Yeah.
And just about anything in the extreme can kill you. But at the same time, some things that are very deadly are medicinal in lower doses.
Yep.
Digitalis and nightshade and things like that will kill you if you take enough of them. If you lower the dosage, they can, digitalis can cause a heart attack if you take too much of it. It can also help you prevent one if you take a smaller amount of it.
Yeah.
Um, and things like that. But at any rate, he outlined the idea of four types of elemental spirit: salamanders, which were fire elementals; gnomes, which were earth elementals; undines, which are water elementals; and sylphs are actually air, associated with the air.
Mm.
They're
Okay.
flying creatures, they're not really water creatures. Um, nymphs are more of I think what you're thinking of, Lisa for Truth.
Yeah.
Nymphs,
They
um,
usually hung around like lakes and rivers and bodies of water like that. Inland
um,
bodies.
and Lisa, by all means, I had to look it up to remind myself. Was thinking the exact same thing, so it's not a big mistake.
No, I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, it's like I thought she was right, but something was tickling the back of my brain, so I googled and went, "Oh, right."
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes
but
it's the same kind of creature, just with different names in different
yeah,
places.
which would raise, I think, the question of what you were thinking of, which is what is the difference between a nymph, which, as you said, are associated with lakes and rivers,
Hmm.
and a siren, which is actually a very good question. Um, and as I understand it, nymphs are usually associated with a specific body of water,
Mm.
and they're actually more of a. Where in Greek mythology, sirens were physical creatures that ate the sailors they lured to their doom.
Yes.
In some
Just
versions of
like
the story.
mermaids
Yep.
originally.
Um, nymphs were guardians and protectors of bodies of water. Um, and they were more associated, or usually more spiritual, and less generally less prone to killing people. I want to say. Also, of course, they are very famous for the fact they are frequently chased by satyrs for sexy times. Um, and Brian's also entirely right, as we've talked about many times when we've discussed vampires. We talk about how the lines between fairy and mermaid and dryad, naiad, um, nymph, sylph all get blurred. Are all very clearly defined today, but they're a lot blurrier the further you go back in time.
Mm.
Which is the other reason ever to feel bad about mixing things up, because it's like it's not that simple. It's never been that simple. Um, let's see, what are trying to think along those lines. The other one I always find interesting, and I think of all of the cryptids I know of, it's worth saying, I think of ocean going creatures, I think sea serpents are probably the most, and larger than people think sharks are the most likely cryptids to be out there.
Mm.
Just because, keep in mind, we know more about the far side of the moon than we do the surface of the ocean floor.
Yeah.
No. Sure, we are capable, and we have been down to Challenger Deep, the deepest point in the ocean, in the Mariana Trench. But it's not like we have a ocean base down there carefully documenting all the new forms of life the way that we have the International Space Station. Um, For the record, I'm not saying that sea serpents exist. I'm just saying it wouldn't be shocking to me if we found out one day that they do.
Hmm.
Particularly because there is actually a ocean-going monster that they proved exists. That even though they debated its existence up until the quite up until the early 2000s, which is the giant squid or the whatchamacallit. Yes, even Lisa just said the gigantic squid was long thought to be mythical. Even in the 20th century, people hotly debated if such a thing existed, and if it
Yeah.
did, how big it got. And the thing is, we don't know how big they get. We know they get really big, like shockingly big, and we know that they get into fights with particularly sperm whales, which are our favorite. Both basically both like to eat the other one, but they found sucker marks on never seen a live one, but they found sucker marks on whales so massive it would imply that there may be squids down in the deepest somewhere in the ocean that are bigger than blue whales. But we don't know for sure because we've never actually found one that big.
That's like 20,000 leagues under the sea size giant squids.
Yeah, they get huge. They are definitely not necessarily a threat to modern ships, but some of the older ships probably would have been deeply threatened by a squid if one chose to attack.
The Kraken.
Yep. I think that's where the Kraken story comes from. It's like if you take out the mythical parts, the Kraken starts to sound like a giant squid. And giant squid exists. This isn't in doubt. This isn't in question anymore. We found
Yeah.
live ones. We found the babies.
Well, it only takes one attacking a ship one time for the
Yep.
story to spread.
And again, they found sucker marks on whales, suggesting they get bigger, just like they found bite marks that suggest that sharks may get bigger, even bigger than the 20 bloody feet that's around the largest size that great whites are supposed to reach. I mean, no, some people, there are of course the movies and people who have speculated that they get up to like the 60 feet of megalodon, and I don't. I'm hesitant to rule anything out, but I think it's unlikely.
I think it'd be hard for something like that to eat consistently enough,
Yeah, that'd be
not be
the issue.
seen.
But especially because the classic idea is the megalodon survived, and the problem with that idea hypothesis, aside from the fact there's no physical evidence, is megalodon fed on. Blue whales are maybe big enough to be a meal for something for a 60-foot shark.
Yeah,
Um, the prey has gotten smaller, so sharks have evolved with that.
yeah.
Um,
That's why the big ones died out.
yeah. The other side of that as well is that um, even modern great whites they take large meals, they travel enormous distances. We don't know that much about whites. And I think and here's the other big kicker. Megalodon is a coastal shark. They weren't, the Meg movie suggests that one was hiding out in the Marianas Trench,
Yeah,
which would be an obvious place to hide a really big creature. But that isn't the waters that Megalodon was found in. It was found close to the coast, so close to the shorelines. A deep sea animal is the sort of thing we could easily have overlooked and still be out there. Something that lives right along our coastlines,
yeah,
somebody would have seen it
yeah,
by now. But say a 25 or even a 30-foot great white would be frighteningly huge and bigger than anything we've ever seen, but isn't as crazy as like a full size 40 to 60-foot megalodon.
that'd be about the size of the shark in the Jaws movies.
Yes. which is a fascinating story in its own right. Peter Benchley said several times before his death that if he knew what he knew about great whites when he made and later in life when he made the Jaws movie or wrote the novel, he would never have written the novel.
Yeah. Yeah, that movie and that book did a lot of harm to the great white shark.
Sharks in general, but particularly the white.
Yeah.
And it's like, do whites attack people? Yes, very rarely. Um, but even among sharks, and it's extremely rare that a shark attacks a person. Keep in mind, there's about 10 fatalities by shark attack a year.
Mhm.
Oh, that's an excellent thing I hadn't even thought of, and I'll come back to that in a second. Lisa for Truth commenting that it makes you wonder if the giant squid is responsible for disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. I want to complete the thought about the sharks, but I'll come back to the Bermuda Triangle because that's a great nautical thing to talk about.
Ah, yes.
But just as a point of reference, more people die every year from vending machines tipping over than in shark attacks.
Poor
From
cows.
cows kill more people than sharks, for God's sakes.
Yep.
Look, let's face it. Can you just see da dun da dun da dun coming soon to a field near you? Cow.
Yep. That's what I want to see. I want to see the movie about the rampaging killer cow.
Somehow have to be.
It'd be as good as Night of the Lepus. It'd be great.
Yes, I agree. But Lisa brings up an excellent point about one of the most famous, deer too, for that matter. And Lisa, that's an excellent point. As someone from Pennsylvania, where deer are one of the. Actually, I want to say, and I could be wrong, but if memory serves, I want to say deer are actually responsible for more collision fatalities than drunk driving in
Mm,
Pennsylvania.
it's a lot. Yeah.
If it's not, it's a real still a frighteningly high number. But Lisa did bring up an excellent point of the Bermuda Triangle, one of the most famous mysteries of the ocean. And
Or one of the most misunderstood and overhyped.
also true. But the legend goes that there's a part of the ocean usually drawn between Florida, um, Puerto Rico, and the Grand Bahama Island that forms a triangle. And a mysterious number of ships and planes, I've even heard supposedly satellites, have vanished out of this area of the ocean. What's also interesting is there are a number of places all over the world. One's out in Asia, one's around the Great Lakes, that also supposedly make this triangle of mysterious disappearances. Lisa asked if the giant squid makes you wonder if the giant squid is responsible for the disappearances in the triangle. And people have suggested all sorts of things from the at least plausible, like giant squid, because it is an actual thing, um, or that it's methane bubbles that that sink, capsize the ship, or blow high enough to screw with an airplane, which is also at least a possibility. But you know what? There's a simpler answer, um, and it's an answer a lot of people don't think of. But Brian hit it on the nose, which is it's overhyped.
Well, it was originally made up by a newspaperman.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, let's be fair. There are planes and ships that have vanished in this part of the ocean before. This is not unusual. Ships and planes have been going missing for hundreds of years for a very simple reason. If something goes down in the ocean and you just have some dude floating on the top of the water, You're looking for a very tiny object in a very wide expanse.
Yeah.
To find your target. Instead of the popular myth that there's some mysterious force, the truth is the number of disappearances that take place in the area that's defined as the triangle, once you take out all of the ships that never existed, because that original newspaper man and many other people love to just make up ships that didn't exist and say they vanished in the triangle. So either they didn't exist or the disappearance was so effective that every record of the ship ever existing went with it. And then once you weed those out, there's another problem that authors like to take any ship that at any point in its known or any plane, in its known flight path, in its known, path through the ocean, might have crossed through the Bermuda Triangle, and then blame that on the triangle. They've even claimed that a ship that's last reported position was in the Pacific Ocean disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah.
And no, not the triangle that's in the Pacific, because there is one in the Pacific. They claim it was the Bermuda Triangle. So once you weed all of that out, fewer people disappear in that area than would be statistically predicted by the number of averages disappearances in the ocean.
Mm.
It's particularly given it is Puerto Rico and the Bahamas are major tourist destinations, and many important shipping lanes pass through that area of the ocean. It's kind of lower than you'd expect.
Yeah, more
And
ships go down in Lake Michigan.
Yep. And one of the most famous. There's a famous flight of bombers that famously disappeared in the Triangle.
Oh yeah.
Let me get the exact number. Flight 19. It was a flight of U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers that vanished on December 5th, 1945. Now, famously, people tell you that these were highly experienced pilots that simply vanished. That isn't true. It was a training flight. More importantly, the captain that was leading the mission and navigator were experienced pilots. But the head navigator's the compass on his plane wasn't functioning properly.
Mm.
And that's where they got into trouble. If you listen to the radio broadcasts, they talk about that they're flying, they're starting to run low on fuel. And they're surprised because they see the Florida Keys. But where they would expect the Florida Keys to be on the left side of the plane, it's on the right. Now they think this is a good thing because if the Florida Keys are on your right and you keep flying north, you're going to hit land. Because you're flying over the Gulf of Mexico. Everything north of the Gulf of Mexico is land if you go far enough. So they keep flying until they eventually disappear and presumably crash.
Mm.
Now, it's possible that people that they just ran out of gas over the Gulf. Well, they should have had enough gas to reach land if they were where they thought they were. The answer is they weren't where they thought they were. If you go further south, there is a chain of islands in the Bahamas that, particularly from the air, look a lot like the Florida Keys. That aren't far away from where the plane's last known location was. if the planes had gotten it wrong and were flying north with this set of islands to their right, they would have been flying over open ocean for a long time, which means they would have eventually run out of fuel and crashed. And also, quite importantly, means all of the rescue missions would be off by miles and looking in the wrong part of the ocean.
Yeah.
And while it's not as exciting as alternate dimensions, this is a much more likely explanation for the Bermuda Triangle. Inexperienced pilots got confused. They had an experienced navigator that should have helped them out of this mess. His compass wasn't working reliably, and they had to rely on a different compass that wasn't as, being read by somebody who wasn't as experienced. What's interesting as well, and this is not the triangle itself, is near there. There's a stretch of ocean that Christopher Columbus yet again sailed through. While sailing through it, his navigator told him it's like the devil has a hold of the compass needle because the compass was just spinning wildly. This is often associated, and I've seen books even say that this area is in the Bermuda Triangle. It's not. It's not terribly far away, but it's not part of the triangle itself. And what's going on is not paranormal, but it is kind of interesting. We all know that there are magnetic fields over the Earth that help keep radiation away. The Van Allen belts. Apparently, there's a natural hiccup or anomaly in the Van Allen belts over this particular stretch of ocean, which means that, yeah, it screws with electronic equipment, it screws with compasses. Um, and it looks really, when you're a sailor from Italy or Spain in the 15th century, and all of a sudden your compass goes haywire, it's a little weird, but it's not paranormal. Lord Ruin, who has also joined us, also made a comment that he knows of rivers and lakes around New York that have a lot of spirits in them and cement shoes. Brian, do you want to comment on the cement shoes thing? Or shall I?
Yeah, I can talk about it. It's kind of funny. It's not actually wasn't actually done as often as it's made out in the sort of gangster folklore. It was probably done a couple of times for real, and then frequently referred to and picked up by like movies and novels and things like that. But yeah, it was basically they would put a guy's feet in a cement bucket, wait for it to harden, and then drop them over into the East or the Hudson River.
And the thing about it is, it's kind of the way that it's usually depicted, where they wait for it to harden and then throw them still alive into the water.
Mm.
Probably never happened at all.
No,
because the
it's
thing
much
is,
easier to weigh
how
down
do
a
you get?
body.
Well, that's not yeah. And the reality is, who the hell's going to stand there and wait for the cement to harden?
Well, the idea was they were tied up. They were usually tied up in a chair, but
But yeah, but
yeah.
it
It's
can
so it takes a
take
while. It takes a while for cement to really harden. So,
24. I just looked it up. It
yeah,
takes on average 24 to 48 hours for cement to harden.
yeah. And no
Tied up or
gangsters
not,
have
keeping
that kind of
somebody.
patience.
Yeah, exactly. The gangster doesn't have the patience. Take care of Lisa for truth. She's got to go.
Okay.
The person in the chair is going to be squirming and wriggling and trying to get out of the knots.
Yeah.
It's not a realistic method of execution of, okay, we're going to stick your feet in cement, and then a day or two from now, we're going to throw you in the water.
Yeah.
Like you said, it was a way to weigh down bodies. They would sometimes, yeah, they would weigh, use cement to weigh the body down and then throw the dead person into the river.
Yeah. But it was just as easy, honestly, to get a couple of cinder blocks, tie it to the body
Yeah.
and be done.
The reality was they didn't even do that often because It's just
No,
not
usually they
practical.
just left them somewhere.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I meant the kill the person, then use the cement shoes idea.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, again, half the time they just leave it somewhere, bury them in an unmarked grave.
Mm,
There's plenty of other options.
yeah.
Yes, Lord Ruin points out that he learned from a Japanese movie that there are spirits that live in wells as well. Yeah, that's true. There are spirits associated with wells. There are even angels associated with wells. The Archangel Michael is associated with a couple of wells. For not necessarily that he lives in the well, but that he blessed the well or visited the well or something to that effect. But there are spirits associated with wells. As far as I know, and I'm not saying this for absolute certain, but as far as I know, the whole legend, the whole idea of throwing money into well and making a wish comes from the idea that wells have guardian spirits,
Mm,
and it's an offering to the spirit to get some good luck.
makes sense. Same thing with like fountains.
Yep, fountains as well. Wishing well, although I think increasingly fountains has more to do with charity than it has to do with folklore.
Yeah,
Because lots of places that have public fountains collect the money and then donate it to some cause or other, or simply donate it and keep it.
yeah.
It's also, for example, why a lot of places get quite upset with you if you jump in the fountain and try to collect on the money down there. It's like, no, they're probably doing something with that.
Yeah. Plus, they don't want people just splashing around in the fountain.
Also true. But
So
okay, it's
sea
getting on,
dragons. No, kidding.
which gets into Asian folklore and the fact dragons are as much divine beings as they are anything else in Asia.
Mhm.
Gods of the sea or the rivers, lakes, things of that nature. I was actually about to say it's getting to 9 o'clock and we should probably wrap up.
Yeah, we can.
Um, we will be back tentatively next week. Keep an eye on the Paranormal Encyclopedia on YouTube. Always remember not on YouTube, on Facebook. Always remember the because there's another page that's already called Paranormal Encyclopedia, and that's not us. I will post at least the night of if we have to cancel a show for one reason or another. I will answer that real quick because it's an easy one, Lord Ruin. Lord Ruin asked if I have any stories about myself and Lou dealing with what are spirits or beings. Um, Lou and I, no, never came up. Me, actually, yes. This is slightly longer than I thought, but I will cover it real quickly. There is a lake in Romania that is a man made lake. Um, the name of which eludes me, and I'd have to go digging through things to find it. So I'm not going to say, but there's a lake in Romania. It was made by the communists by flooding out a town. Now, they did not deliberately drown an entire town's worth of people. That's not what happened. It's more like the U.S. idea of eminent domain, where it's, yeah, for the greater good of the Communist Party, we're taking over your town, throwing you all out, and flooding it to create this new reservoir. Damming it, basically. People weren't happy about it, and both a graveyard and a church were flooded over. So there is a legend in Romania that a few people every year drowned. What? Okay, yeah, that's an old one from Lou. But to go on with the story, um, so the story is that every year so many people drown in this lake as a tribute to the fact they flooded over both the church and a graveyard. And the spirits are angry. Their bodies were left and are now underwater, basically. I can't say that I saw a spirit during my brief visit to the lake, But there's something very weird about that lake. One of my tour guides, Nora, told me a story of being out on the lake in a boat. She'd been on boats many times. She's not one prone to seasickness. But when they were in a particular part of the lake, suddenly feeling a very weird sense of vertigo. For my own part, there was also almost something inviting about the lake. Like it wanted people to go swimming, which was a little creepy. Especially because I got that feel from the lake before anyone told me this story. But that's the closest I came to having an experience with a water spirit or other water being. Um, I'm going to close on Lord Ruin's last point, just because it's a fun reminder of the past, where he said he heard from a very popular and old internet show that Lou, meaning Lou Gentili, my mentor, was the man that Satan loved to hate. Is this true? Yes, I can confirm. Lou was the man that Satan loved to hate. For those of you who don't know or need a reminder, back in the late early 2000s, I was the co-host of the Lou Gentili Show, not only a nationally syndicated radio show, but one of the first internet radio shows, hosted, of course, by my mentor, the late Lou Gentili. The man Satan loves to hate was one of our taglines. But I think that's going to do it for tonight. This is Kevin Mears, the demonologist and paranormal encyclopedia, saying good night and God bless. Brian,
Brian McKinley saying, keep your fangs sharp.
good night, everybody. We'll see you next week. Hold on. Holding, end. No, that's good.